Have you ever wondered why certain people seem to be constantly surrounded by drama? As if they're walking magnets for emotional vampires, manipulators, and all kinds of toxic personalities, while others navigate the very same world, walk the same streets, share the same spaces, and yet remain almost invisible to such predators? Maybe you've looked around, worn out and emotionally depleted, and thought to yourself, why is this always happening to me? Why do people like that keep targeting me? If you're here watching this video, chances are you're tired. Tired of feeling drained, manipulated, or like you're stuck in someone else's psychological chess game. Maybe you're the type who always tries to keep the peace, gives too much of yourself, avoids conflict at all costs, and yet still finds yourself locked in the same patterns of toxic relationships. And maybe, deep down, you've started to believe that the problem must be you. But I urge you to stay with me until the end, because what we're about to explore might unlock something within you. Carl Jung, the pioneer of analytical psychology, discovered a truth that few people ever realize. It's not just about bad luck or random fate. There's a hidden, almost imperceptible mechanism that determines who toxic people are drawn to and who they overlook. And it's not that these overlooked people are louder, stronger, or more aggressive. The truth is far more subtle and far more powerful. Toxic individuals are emotional predators. They're adept at sensing the emotional wounds you haven't yet healed. They pick up on your insecurities, fears, and inner vulnerabilities, often the very ones you've worked hard to conceal, and that's exactly what makes you visible to them. But here's the paradox. The key to becoming psychologically untouchable isn't in fighting back. It's not in cutting people off, yelling, or building high emotional walls. The true key lies in something Jung called integrating your shadow. I'm speaking directly to you, the one who's tired of being exhausted, of carrying emotional burdens that don't belong to you, of feeling like you must always be on alert. There is a way out, but it's not the one most people talk about. It's not about mantras, catchy affirmations, or simply writing down your boundaries. It requires deeper work. You must confront and embrace the parts of yourself that you've tried to ignore or deny, the darker aspects, the pieces you may be ashamed to admit even exist. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." And it's this self-awareness that changes everything. Because once you stop projecting your unhealed parts onto other people, those toxic individuals stop seeing you as prey. It's like you become invisible to them, not because you're hiding, but because you've sealed the emotional openings they once used to get in. So stick with me, because today I'll show you how to unlock this transformation, not just to keep toxic people at bay, but to finally experience emotional freedom. The freedom to form healthy relationships. The freedom to move through the world without fear. The freedom to be fully yourself, without the invisible chains. Because the real secret has never been about resisting toxicity. It has always been about rising above the need for validation from those who dwell in darkness. Are you ready? Let's step into this deep territory, where few are willing to go. Carl Jung, in all his brilliance, spent much of his life exploring the invisible architecture of the human mind. One of his greatest insights was this: unconscious patterns, often shaped by childhood wounds and unresolved emotional trauma, can show up in our behavior and relationships in ways that are destructive, even if they appear socially acceptable on the surface. Toxic people don't show up randomly, and they don't choose their targets by chance. They have a near instinctual ability to detect emotional injury. It's as if they sense the resonance of your shadow, your suppressed fears, hidden shame, or unmet emotional needs. If you find yourself repeatedly caught up in drama, manipulation, or relationships where you constantly have to prove your worth, know this: it's not happening because you're broken. It's happening because, without realizing it, you're emitting signals that say, "There's still something in me that's hurting." Jung called this process projection. Everything you haven't accepted within yourself, everything you've buried, leaks out in subtle ways. And toxic people pick up on it. They're like emotional predators drawn to your vulnerability. They gain power and control by feeding on the chaos you carry inside. But Jung also made a powerful discovery. When you begin to integrate those repressed parts of yourself, your shadow, you develop something he called psychic integrity. This isn't just a concept. It's a felt, almost tangible state. You start to emit a frequency that repels emotional manipulators. They sense that you no longer respond to the old emotional cues. You're not afraid. You're not desperate for approval. You're not trying to prove anything. And that makes you uninteresting to them. People with psychic integrity don't live in defense mode. They're not always bracing for attack. They live from a place of internal clarity. They know who they are, what they value, and most importantly, what they will never again tolerate. And others can feel this, especially those who once thrived on your insecurity. Denying the shadow doesn't make it go away. It makes you weak. But when you embrace it, when you meet it face to face, it becomes your strength. It protects you. It repels those who would exploit you. You may be wondering, how can I do that? How do I integrate a part of myself I can't even identify? That's where the real work begins. Because this transformation doesn't come from feel-good quotes or a few hours of reading. It's a profound, sometimes painful, but ultimately liberating journey. In the next part, we'll go further. We'll learn to identify your projections, and you'll discover why the traits that most irritate or fascinate you in toxic people are often reflections of wounds within you. Are you ready for this step? Let's keep going. We've now arrived at a place most people avoid: turning the gaze inward. Why? Because it's easier to blame the world, to label others as narcissists, manipulators, or emotional vampires. And those labels might even be accurate. But if the solution were as simple as cutting contact with toxic individuals, then leaving them behind would solve everything. You'd walk away and be free. But you know that's not how it works. You may have changed jobs, homes, even cities, only to find yourself entangled in the same patterns once again. You end one abusive relationship only to begin another. You escape a controlling boss and find yourself under the thumb of someone just like them. You distance yourself from one manipulative friend only for another to enter your life. Why does this keep happening? Carl Jung gave us a sobering yet empowering answer. That which disturbs or fascinates us in others often reflects something unresolved within ourselves. This is the concept of projection. When we disown certain parts of who we are, parts we can't accept, parts we were told were wrong or shameful, we unconsciously project them onto other people. That person who enrages or mesmerizes you, they may be embodying something you've repressed. Maybe you can't stand their selfishness or arrogance, but maybe deep down, there's a part of you that also longs to say no, to take up space, to assert yourself without guilt. That part of you may have been shut down long ago, perhaps in childhood, when you were taught that anger is dangerous, that speaking up is disrespectful, that wanting to be seen is selfish. So you buried those desires, and when someone else embodies them without shame, it creates a powerful reaction in you: hatred, disgust, or a strange fascination. Jung said, "Only the change in the individual's attitude can bring about the transformation of the collective." What he meant is that until you confront what's wounded within you, you will continue to send out signals that say, "Here is pain, here is fear, here is vulnerability." And those signals will be heard, especially by those who prey on them. Recognizing your own projections isn't easy. It takes courage to admit that the victim role, as real as it may feel, is often linked to something deeper inside. But this is exactly where your strength begins to awaken. The moment you honestly ask yourself, "What is this person showing me about myself?" you begin reclaiming your scattered energy. Instead of wasting effort trying to change others, you redirect it toward understanding and healing yourself. This isn't about blaming yourself for what toxic people do. It's about realizing that, while you can't control who shows up in your life, you absolutely can control the signals you send out. When you stop projecting your wounds, you become uninviting to emotional predators. They lose their leverage. But there's another critical step on this path, one that many overlook. It's about not feeding the game anymore. Ready to go deeper? Then let's keep going. Now that you've begun to see the projections you carry, it's time to talk about something as vital: drama. Because recognizing your inner shadows is only the first step. If you continue to feed the emotional games of toxic people, nothing changes. And here's a difficult truth. Often, without even realizing it, we're the ones providing exactly the energy that these people thrive on. Toxic individuals need more than your presence. They need your emotional fuel. They live off your fear, your outrage, your insecurity, your emotional reactions. Every time you lose your temper, every time you plead, argue, over-explain, or cry in frustration, you're unknowingly feeding them. It's a dance. They prod, you react. They toss out small emotional hooks, a snide remark, a passive-aggressive silence, a loaded comment, and they watch. The moment you bite, the moment you lose your center, they win. Because from that point on, the conversation isn't about what they did. It becomes about how you reacted. You become the problem. You're too sensitive, too emotional, overreacting. And worst of all, you start to question yourself. How many times have you tried to explain your perspective calmly and rationally, only to walk away confused, second-guessing your own sanity? That's not an accident. Toxic people are masters at destabilizing your sense of reality. If they can get you emotionally unbalanced, they've already gained control. Jung taught us, what you resist not only persists, it grows stronger. When you react intensely, you're confirming that this affects you, and that very response becomes a tool they use against you. They observe, they learn what gets to you, and then they use it, again and again. So what's the antidote? Neutrality. And let's be clear, neutrality is not weakness. It's not passive resignation. It's one of the most powerful things you can practice. When you meet provocations with calm, with silence, or simply by not engaging, you disarm the other person entirely. You remove their power source. They throw bait, and you don't bite. Toxic people can't stand when their games don't work. If they can't get a reaction, they quickly lose interest. Over time, they begin to avoid you altogether, because your presence reminds them they have no control here. But achieving that level of neutrality requires something crucial: the ability to regulate your emotional responses. And that's not easy, especially when your past wounds are still raw. That's why, in addition to recognizing projections and refusing to fuel the drama, you must develop another core strength: internal boundaries. And that's what we'll explore next. Many people believe that boundaries simply mean saying no to others. But here's something rarely said. External boundaries are useless if you haven't built internal ones. Toxic people don't just invade your time or your space, they infiltrate your mind. And they do this through doors you haven't yet closed, your unresolved emotional needs, the need to be liked, the need to please, the need to avoid conflict, the need to be seen as generous, understanding, or always the bigger person. As long as these needs scream silently within you, anyone can manipulate you. All it takes is a threat to withdraw approval, affection, or respect. Often, nothing even needs to be said. A cold look, a sigh, a sudden silence, and you're thrown into a panic. You rush to fix things, to apologize, to explain. And just like that, they have you under their thumb again. Internal boundaries are the opposite of this. They are the quiet knowledge that you do not need anyone's approval to be whole, that your self-worth is not up for negotiation. They are born of clarity about who you are, what you want, and what you refuse to tolerate. And most importantly, internal boundaries are backed by action. They mean you are willing to risk losing approval, affection, even relationships, to remain true to yourself. This doesn't mean living guarded or distrustful. In fact, the more solid your inner boundaries, the more relaxed and open you become, because you are no longer haunted by the fear of rejection. This internal stability becomes visible. Everyone around you can sense it, including toxic people. And once they feel it, they retreat. There's nothing left to grip. Internal boundaries also mean you stop falling for manipulative tactics. When someone tries to provoke you, test you, or guilt you, you can see it, but you don't respond. You remain centered. Their opinions or emotions no longer control your sense of self. But let's be honest. Developing these inner boundaries takes courage. It demands facing your own unmet needs, the part of you that still feels small, lonely, desperate to be seen as good. It requires you to sit with the fear of being alone, misunderstood, or called selfish. But this is the path to real freedom. No one wakes up one day with indestructible boundaries. It's a process. But every time you stay grounded in your truth, even when it costs you someone's approval, you grow stronger. You begin to exude an energy of self-respect that toxic people instinctively avoid. Yet there is still one final, essential piece, one that lies at the very heart of all vulnerability. You must have the courage to face the darkest part of yourself. And that's what we'll explore next. We now enter the most challenging, and paradoxically, the most liberating stage of this journey, embracing your own darkness. So far, we've talked about projection, emotional neutrality, and building internal boundaries. But beneath all of these lies the deepest root of vulnerability, the part that toxic people instinctively detect, even when we try so hard to hide it. That root is our refusal to accept the darkest aspects of ourselves. Carl Jung said, "To confront a person with his shadow is to show him his own light." In other words, the path to wholeness is not in denying what's uncomfortable, but in meeting it, owning it. Because everything you bury, every thought you pretend you've never had, every feeling you label as unacceptable, these are the very things that others can use against you. When you disown parts of yourself, you become vulnerable to manipulation. Let's be honest here. We all have a dark side. We've all felt envy. We've all judged. We've all had moments of pettiness, pride, resentment, or the urge to manipulate. At some point, every single one of us has fantasized about winning an argument, proving someone wrong, or making someone feel what we felt. These impulses don't make you a bad person. They make you human. But instead of facing them, we tend to suppress them. We say, "That's not me. I would never feel that." And so those feelings sink deeper into the unconscious. But they don't go away. They fester. They grow stronger. And eventually, they find a way to leak out. Either in toxic relationships, chronic guilt, people-pleasing, perfectionism, or endless self-doubt. The more you try to hide your shadow, the more power it has over you. And worse, the more open you become to those who know exactly how to trigger your shame. Toxic people sense where you're trying too hard to be perfect. They poke at your desire to be seen as kind, reasonable, or flawless. And when they do, you react. You lose control. You try to prove them wrong. And just like that, the cycle starts again. But when you face your darkness, when you accept that those thoughts and impulses exist, you neutralize them. You stop being afraid of being exposed because there's nothing left to expose. You already know who you are. You've made peace with it. And that makes you untouchable. To integrate your shadow isn't to become cruel, selfish, or harsh. It's to acknowledge that those traits live within you, and to choose consciously not to be ruled by them. It means owning your capacity for rage without letting it control your behavior. It means recognizing your need for power without abusing it. It means seeing your envy clearly enough to transform it into growth. When you accept that you're capable of being both the hero and the villain, you gain choice. You become more compassionate, not because you suppress judgment, but because you understand it. You stop being reactive because you know your own depths. You become calm because nothing anyone can say about you will catch you off guard. You've already met your demons. This is the essence of psychological freedom, and it radiates in ways others can feel. Toxic people feed on guilt, shame, and the desire to hide. When you stand fully in your truth, they lose all power. There's no hook left, no mask to rip off, no weakness to exploit. They walk away, not because you fought them, but because you no longer reflect their chaos. Carl Jung gave us an extraordinary gift. He showed us that we don't have to fear our darkness. We don't need to eliminate it. We need to befriend it. We need to bring it into the light, so it no longer controls us from the shadows. Because the truth is, you can't control toxic people. You can't erase manipulation from the world. You can't make everyone around you healthy. But you can become the kind of person who no longer attracts, entertains, or fuels that energy. When you've integrated your shadow, when you've stopped projecting your wounds, when your internal boundaries are solid and your emotional neutrality is strong, you become energetically unavailable to toxic people. You move through the world differently. You stop leaking emotional energy. You stop sending out unconscious signals that say, "I need your approval." You stop being a participant in their games, and the ripple effect is profound. Your relationships shift. You start attracting grounded, self-aware people. You stop feeling drained by social situations. You no longer waste time managing how others perceive you. You finally get to show up fully, as yourself, flaws and all, and feel peace. Jung once said, "What you resist, persists." As long as you resist your darkness, it will show up again and again, often through people who force you to look at it. But the moment you choose to integrate it, your entire life begins to reorganize. You begin to experience something few people ever do, the sensation of being whole. If this spoke to something deep inside you, if at any point you thought, This is exactly what I needed. I invite you to take one step forward right now. Write in the comments the part that struck you most. Why? Because putting it into words is already an act of healing. It's how the unconscious becomes conscious. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Stay with this process. The next video is just as essential as this one. I'll see you there.